Milo is being railroaded by the cathedral media at the behest of an anti-Trump CIA operative discontented that his ilk is losing the grip on conservatism. This whole thing is slightly bigger than Milo. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Alright, this is the second part of the talk on Milo Yiannopoulos' latest and biggest controversy. Just like in the first part, I invite the listener to look at the facts first and foremost and leave the emotions at the door just for a few minutes before making a judgment. There are two political dimensions to this, the Milo case in particular and the wider context. So let's look at Milo's case in particular first of all. As I showed in the first part, Milo is being railroaded by several comments he made in January 2016 and some other comments he made on the Joe Rogan Experience show in September 2015. I didn't comment on those latter ones because the whole show is satire, so as far as I'm concerned, only the comments in January 2016 are absolutely serious. In any event, this whole brouhaha is resurrected from a carefully editing process of comments made by Yiannopoulos over 1 year ago, and some of them even older than that. The question is why? Why now? Why not in February 2016 or in September 2016 when Milo's support for Donald Trump in college campuses was clearly having an effect? Why just now? Well, it's complicated, so let's back this up a little bit. Several days ago, Milo Yiannopoulos is falsely announced as the keynote speaker at the Conservative Political Action Conference, or CPAC. He actually was never meant to be the keynote speaker, just one of the many speakers. The keynote address was to be delivered by Michael Reagan, the eldest son of President Ronald Reagan, so there was an instance of fake news right from the get-go. In any event, this decision wasn't to the liking of many individuals within the conservative establishment for many reasons, including, yes, the fact that Milo is a fag. You have to remember, CPAC is a collection of individuals aged between 60 and deceased. It's a bunch of old and very, very old farts who understand very little about pop culture and who grew up in radically different times. And their idea to appeal to young people is to make another pompous conference with the same old farts to intellectualize about how young people think and what they want. If anything, CPAC, and especially the reliance on CPAC as some sort of a relevant bastion, is part of the reason why conservatives have been losing the culture wars until very recently. CPAC appeals to people aged 60 and above. Milo appeals to people aged 12 to 50. It doesn't take a genius to know who is the future and who is the past. Now, you may not like this, and I certainly am not a big fan of this situation, but it is what it is, and insisting that CPAC is so relevant is simply wishful thinking. Anyway, out of all these people who didn't like Milo being invited, one of them decided to take action. So suddenly, a minuscule Twitter account linked to a minuscule website with literally 2 posts on it, called the Reagan Battalion, decided to rip into Milo. The Reagan Battalion is the organization of the militant Mormon CIA operative, never-Trumper and former presidential candidate Evan McMullin. You remember him? It's the guy who ran a presidential campaign with the sole purpose of winning Utah and deprive Trump of the electoral votes in that state. He obviously failed, but he never stopped trying to undermine Trump and anyone even remotely seen as associated with Donald Trump. McMullin's involvement in this is not hidden to anyone. Just a quick glance at the Twitter feeds tells the story. He doesn't hide it. In fact, he is proud of his achievement of getting Milo disinvited from the CPAC conference. However, there is slightly more to the story. Besides McMullin, there's also the leftist media and the establishment conservative media, such as the National Review, which has its own bone to pick with Milo for obvious reasons. He's way too efficient and nobody can have that. This is a post from 4chan, posted before the media shitstorm began. At the moment when this was posted, the scandal had not begun yet. And to the surprise of exactly nobody, as the lessons of Game Journo's mail lists taught us, this story was sat on for months, and the so-called journalists colluded with each other to dump the story in a coordinated fashion. As a result of all this, the leftists' desire to see Milo's book deal rescinded was finally granted, and also McMullen's desire to see Milo's invitation to CPAC rescinded was also granted. So why is this still a story? Well, because the issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution. This is and has been standard leftist playbook for decades. Rule number 13, pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. Go after people, not institutions. People hurt faster than institutions. This is exactly what is being done to Milo right now. The leftist media and the never-Trumpers are trying to cut off one of the most efficient individuals of the anti-status quo camp. And with this goal in mind, nothing is off limits. No hypocrisy too great, no lies too big, and no tactic is too bad. That's how you see Glenn Beck's The Blaze writing just like the Huffington Post, or the National Review acting like Salon. Now, speaking of Salon, they're now scrubbing their own website of the things they're accusing Milo of. Unlike Milo, Salon did actually defend pedophilia and did actually try to normalize the sexual attraction of adults to prepubescent children. And also, unlike Milo, Jonah Goldberg and National Review did actually try to normalize pedophilia and acted as cheerleaders for Salon.com and praised their quote-unquote courage for publishing the chilling articles of Todd Nickerson, a legit, honest-to-God pedophile. That's why I always say that everything, and I mean everything about the left, is projection. My rule of thumb is confirmed once again for the gazillionth time. The actual pedo enablers are accusing someone of the non-left of being one. Milo's sole crime is having stepped off the reservation in terms of acceptable behavior of both the fringes of the left and some of the fringes of the right. The fringes of the right don't like him because he supports Trump, he's much too libertine, and he cracks insensitive jokes. The fringes of the left don't like him because he supports Trump, he refuses to pay reverence to the favorite militant leftist causes du jour, such as feminism, LGBTism, anti-white racism, and so on and so forth, and he cracks insensitive jokes. The difference is that the fringes of the leftist thought rule the leftist train. The worst thing the fringes of the right could do to him was to disinvite him from CPAC. The worst the fringes of the left can do to him is to crucify him all over the media. So, to sum up this part, they called him a racist, and it didn't work. They called him a sexist, and it didn't work. They called him alt-right, and it didn't work. They called him a Nazi, and it didn't work. Now they're calling him a pedophile. Will this work? Well, I'm not convinced. In the not-so-distant past, this used to be a silver bullet. But then again, in the past, being called a racist used to be a silver bullet too. Considering how many actual pedos have been rewarded with fame, Lena Dunham is a good example of that, and considering how many convicted molesters still do get standing ovations, remember Roman Polanski? The public is just no longer that sensitive as it used to be. And that's a bad thing in and of itself, but it's also a fact that the power of the pedo allegation has been greatly diminished. And throwing it around on someone who is most definitely not one will only diminish it even more. Also, you will excuse me if I don't fall for the faux outrage of the political side that wants masturbation classes for 3-year-olds in state schools. For this sorry lot, 7-year-olds are old enough to be given case studies about wanking and fantasizing about sex with old men. This is policy in many countries, mind you, and an ideal of the international left. Meanwhile, Milo cracks up a joke about being molested by a Catholic priest when he was 13. Yeah, I'll take Milo with his dark humor, thank you very much. But as I was saying at the beginning, there is also another political dimension here, namely the wider context. This is a war between the establishment and the alternative media figures. Whoever hasn't figured this out yet simply hasn't been paying attention. Milo is an alternative media figure in his own right. He also works for Breitbart, a huge alternative media empire in its own right. The former chairman of Breitbart, Steve Bannon, is a White House advisor. It doesn't take a genius to put two and two together to realize just how many entrenched established interests are being threatened by this situation, especially considering that none other than the President of the United States declared the establishment media as being the enemy of the people. The cathedral feels its power threatened. We know it, they know it, everyone knows it. The question is whether the alternative media is prepared to fight this war. Because if not, we will lose big league and the window of opportunity will be shut down again for another 20 to 40 years. What's happening to Milo is not an accident. Just a week ago, the Wall Street Journal, the biggest newspaper in the United States, commissioned a paid task force to sift through the videos of Felix Schjelber, better known as PewDiePie, to frame him as a Nazi. As a result, he lost his contract with Disney and was placed in an adversarial position with the media. To his credit, he doubled down on it and told the media to go fuck itself. Now that is good. That's how it should be done. But will other alternative media figures have the same balls? After all, PewDiePie dwarfs the Wall Street Journal in influence and viewership, so you can say that he can afford to do that. But will others? The reason I'm asking these is not to sound rhetorically smart, but because the tide of nonsense is coming on everyone who is off the reservation. I would be very surprised if we are not going to read about Sargon being a pedophile in a few months or a year. You think I'm joking? Sargon has a young son. All it takes is a bit of coordination and a credible narrative and bam! You can make tens of thousands of people believe that Sargon's son is in danger of being fiddled by his father. How about Dave Rubin or Mike Cernovich? If you think this can't happen and it won't happen, congratulations for your unfettered optimism. And I'm serious. This is war, and in war, you have to fight. Relying on the opponent's goodwill is not a strategy. The establishment has proven time and time again that no tactic is too low and no lie is too great not to be used. Never let a good crisis go to waste is a serious motto on the left. Again, this whole thing is bigger than Milo. This is an open battlefield on which everyone is fair game. You may not like Milo, you may think he's a degenerate. Heck, I believe he's a total degenerate. But you go to war with the army you have, not the army you dream about having it. Allowing the opposition to frame the debate is the first step and usually the decisive step towards losing the debate. Don't let them frame the narrative. Frame your own narrative. Steve Bannon, Andrew Breitbart, Milo, and others knew and know this all too well. That's why they win. LARPing about ideological purity for the sake of purity wins over exactly nobody. This is a war for hearts and minds, and the establishment knows it and acts accordingly. Now, will we? I sure do hope that we're much smarter than taking the bait and believing that a liberal Swede is a Nazi and that a race-mixing Jew homo is an alt-right racist pedophile. My father always used to tell me, think for 3 seconds before you open your mouth. Now Milo didn't follow that, but that's not a mortal sin. That's all I had to say. Now the channel will be back to its regular schedule. Thank you for watching, thank you for your continuous support, and I'll see you around on Freedom Alternative.